Empires. An empire, one chapter is an empire across 3 continents, and another chapter is nomadic empires. Islamic land is removed from the new NCERT syllabus. Empires. Over the 2 millennial that followed the establishment of empires in Mesopotamia, various attempts at empire building took place across the region. In the era to west to east of it, by the 6th century before Common Era, Iranians had established control over major part of the Assyrian Empire. Network of the trade developed overland, as well as along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. In the eastern Mediterranean Sea, Greek cities and their colonies benefited from improvement in trade that were the result of these changes. They also benefited from close trade with nomadic peoples to the north of the Black Sea. In Greece, for the most part, city-states such as Athens and Sparta were the focus of the civic life. From among the Greek states, in the late 4th century before Common Era, the ruler of the kingdom of Macedon, Alexander, undertook a series of military campaigns and conquered part of the North Africa, West Asia and Iran, reaching up to the Beams. Here his soldiers refused to proceed further east. Alexander's troops retarded, through many Greek stayed behind. Throughout the area under control, Alexander's control, idea and the culture tradition were shared among the Greeks and the local population. The region on the whole became Hellenized. The Greek were called Hellenes, and Greek became a well-known language throughout. The political unity of the Alexander's empire disintegrated quickly after the death, but for almost 3 centuries after, Hellenistic culture remained important in the area. The period is often referred to as the Hellenistic period in the history of the region, but this ignores the way in which other cultures, especially Iranian culture associated with the old empire of Iran, were as the important as, if not even more important than, Hellenistic notion and ideas. This section deals with the important aspect of the what happened after this. Small but well organized military force of the central Italian city state of the Rome took advantage of the political discord that followed the disintegration of Alexander's empire and established control over North Africa and the eastern Mediterranean from the 2nd century before Common Era. At the time, Rome was a republic. Government was based on a complex system of election, but its political institutions gave some importance to birth and wealth, and society benefited from slavery. The force of Roman established a network for trade between the states that once part of the Alexander's empire. In the middle of the 1st century before Common Era, under Julius Caesar, a high-born military commander, this Roman Empire extended to the present-day Britain and Germany. Latin, spoken in the Roman, was the main language of the empire. Though many in the East continued to use Greek, and the Romans had a great respect for Hellenic culture, there were changes in the political structure of the empire from the late 1st century before Common Era, and it was sustainably Christianized after the conqueror of Constantine became a Christian in the 4th century Common Era. To make government easier, the Roman Empire divided into the eastern and the western halves. In the north in the 4th century CE, but in the west there was a breakdown of the arrangement that existed between Rome and the tribes in the frontier areas, Gothas, Visigoths, Vandalas and others. These arrangements deal with the trade, military recruitment and ruin at the Greek city Corinth. Military recruitment, and this is the photo of ruins at Greek city of the Corinthian settlement, and the tribal increasingly attacked the Roman administration. Conflict increased in the scale and coincided with eternal dissension in the empire, leading to the collapse of empire in the west by the 5th century Common Era. Tribes established their own kingdom within the former empire. Through, with the promoting of the Christian Church, a Holy Roman Empire was formed from some of the kingdoms forth the 19th century Common Era. This claimed some continuity with the Roman Empire. Between the 7th century and the 5th century, almost all the land of the Eastern Roman Empire, centered on the Constantinople, came to be taken over by the Arab Empire created by the followers of the Prophet Muhammad, who found the faith of Islam in the 7th century and centered on the Damascus. Damascus is now the capital of Iraq, Baghdad, and Lebanon is Damascus. Turkey, Cyprus, Syria. Capital of Syria is Damascus, or by its successor, who ruled from Baghdad initially. Baghdad is capital of Iraq in nowadays. There was a close interaction between Greek and Islamic traditions in the region. The trading network of the area and its prosperity attracted the attention of the pastoral peoples to the north, including various Turkish tribes, who often attacked the cities of the region and established control. The last of these people to attack the area and attempt to control it over Mongols under the Genghis Khan and his successor, who moved into West Asia, Europe, Central Asia, and China in the 13th century. All these attempts to make and maintain empire were divided by search to control the resources of the trading network that existed in the region as a whole, and to derive benefit from the links of the region and other areas such as India or China. All the empires involve administrative system to give stability to trade. They also evolved the Great Mosque Damascus. Damascus in now in Syria in 1714, the Great Mosque of Damascus. Different types of military organization. The achievements of one empire were often taken up by its successor. Over time, the area to be marked by Persia, Greek, Latin, Arabic, above many other languages were spoken and written. The empires were not very stable. This was partly due to the dispute and the conflict over resources in various regions. It was also due to the crisis that developed in the relation between empires and the pastoral peoples to the north, from whom empire is driven support both for this trade and to improve them with the labor for production of the manufacture and for their armies. It is worth noting that not all empires were city-centric. The Mongol Empire of Genghis Khan and his successor is a good example of how an empire could be maintained by pastoral peoples for a long time with the success. Regions that appealed to peoples of the different ethnic group who often spoke different languages were important in the making of large empires. This was true in the case of Christianity, which originated in the Palestine in the early 1st century Common Era, and Islamic, which organized in the 7th century Common Era. Timeline between 100 before Common Era to 1300 Common Era. This time focused on the kingdom and empire. Some of these, such as Roman Empire, were very large, spreading across 3 continents. This was also time when some of the major religious and cultural tradition developed. It was time when the institution of the intellectual activities emerged. Books were written and the ideas travel across continents. Some things that are now part of our everyday lives were used for first time during this period. Between 100 before Common Era to 50, bananas introduced from Southeast Asia to East Africa through sea route. Southeast Asia, Indonesian region, Myanmar, Taiwan, Southeast Asia. Mm. In Europe, Spartacus lead the revolt of about 1 lakh slaves in 73 before Common Era. 50 to 1 Common Era, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, uh, building of the Colosseums in Rome. Colosseum, picture of Colosseum is given in the thumbnail. 1 to 50 Common Era is not given. 100 to 150 Hero of Alexandria makes a machine that runs on stream. Roman Empire at its peak in Europe between 100 to 150 Common Era. 150 to 200 Ptolemy of Alexandria writes a work on the geography. In 300 to 350 Common Era, Christianity introduced in the Oxum. Between 330 Common Era, Constantine becomes emperor, established city of Constantinople. Constantinople is currently the Istanbul region of Turkey. 350 to 400 Roman Empire divided into eastern and the western halves. 400 to 450 Vandals from Europe set up a kingdom in the North Africa between 429. Roman Empire divided by cities from North and Central Europe. 450 to 500 Conversion of the Clovis of Gaul, France to Christianity 496. 500 to 550 Saint Benedict established a monastery in Italy in 526. Saint Augustine introduced Christianity in August 596. Gregorian the Great 590 lays the foundation of power of the Roman Catholic Church. 600 to 650 Immigration Hijra of the some Muslims to Abyssinia. Between 650 to 700 Muslim Arabs signed treaty with Nubia south of Egypt. 652 Bede writes in Europe, Bede writes the history of English church and people. In 800 to 850 rise of kingdom in the Ghana. In Europe, in Africa, rise of the kingdom of Ghana. In Europe, Charlemagne, king of the Franks, crowned Holy Roman Emperor in 800. In 850 to 900, in Europe, first Russian takes founded at the Kiev and Novgorod. Between 900 to 950, Vikings raided across Western Europe. In 1000 to 50, medical school set up in the Salerno, Italy in 1030. Anno Domini, which is Common Era. 1050 to 1100 Common Era. Almoravid Kingdom between 1056 Common Era to 1147 Common Era extended from Ghana to southern Spain. In Europe, William of Nomadic invades England and become a king between 1066 Common Era. Proclamation of the first crusade. 1060 crusade is called Dharmyudh, religious war, crusade. 1100 to 1150 Zimbabwe of 1120 to 1450 emerged as a center for the production of gold and copper artifacts and a long distance trade. 1150 to 1200 Christian church established in the Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the Horn of African countries. Construction of the Cathedral of Notre Dame begins. Notre Dame is a church. 1163 Common Era. Between 1200 to 1250, in 1200 in Africa, Kingdom of Mali in the West Africa with the Timbuktu as a center of learning. In the Europe, Saint Francis of Assisi set up a monastic order emphasizing austerity and comparison. In 1209 Common Era, Lords in the England rebel against the king who signed the Magna Carta accepting to rule according to law. In 1250 to 1300 in Europe, establishment of Habsburg dynasty and continued to rule Austria till 1918. Now in Asia and South Asia, basically in South Asia, the greater focus on India. Hundred to 50 before Common Era, Han Empire in China developed of the Silk Route from Asia to Europe. In South Asia, Bactrian Greek. Bactrian is the upper region of Afghanistan, and Sheikhs, Shankas is also the upper regions of the Shankas or Turks. So upper region is Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan are the regions. Established kingdom in the northwest. Rise of the Satvahans in the Deccan. Deccan is the southern region of India. In 15 to 1 Common Era, growing trade between South Asia, Southeast and the East Asia and Europe. In 1 to 50 Common Era, Jesus Christ in the Judah, a province of the Roman Empire, Roman invasion of the Arabia, Arab Peninsula. 50 to 100 Common Era, establishment of Kushnaz state in the northwest and the Central Asia in India. 100 to 150 paper invented in China in 118. Development of the first seismograph. 132 seismograph used to measure the earthquake. 1200 to 1250 end of the Han Empire in Asia, basically in China. Sanside rule in the Persia. In 226 Anno Domini, which is Common Era. 250 to 300 tea at the royal court. Tea originated from the China. Tea at the royal court, China in 262. Use of the magnetic compass in China in 270. 300 to 350 China starts using strip-ups with riding horse. The equipment used for riding horse. Establishment of Gupta dynasty in India. Fahayan travel from China to India. Fahayan written the book Fa Kyuki, and Huyen Sang written the book Ha Kyuki in India. Huyen Sang is a traveler from China to India, which comes under the ruling of the Harshvardhana. And Fahayan travel from China to India. It is also a monk around 399. Aryabhat, astronomer and mathematician from 450 to 500 Common Era. 550 to 600 Buddhism introduced in Japan. 594 Grand Canal to transport grains built in the China from 584 to 680 by 50 lakh workers over 34 years. Chalukya temples in the Badami and Aihole. Chalukya temples, basically Chalukya is the southern part of the regions of India. They ruled 600 to 650. Tang dynasty in China. In 618, Prophet Muhammad goes to Medina. Medina currently in the Saudi Arabia. The region of the Hijri era is 622. Collapse of the Sasanian Empire in 642. Su Xiang travel from China. Xinjiang. Huyen Sang travel for China to India. Nalanda emerged as the important education center. Nalanda Vishwavidyalaya situated in Nalanda, which is destroyed by Bakhtiyar Khilji, which is a military commander of Kutubuddin Aibak. Huyen Sang travel in the region of the Harshvardhana. Harshvardhana rule in the India when Huyen Sang came from China to India. It is also just like Fahyang, it is also a monk. 650 to 700 Umayyad Caliphate in 661 to 750. 700 to 750 a branch of Umayyad conquerors Spain. Tang dynasty established in the China. Arab conqueror Sindh. Sindh is the region of currently in the Pakistan, which is on the west of Rajasthan. 650 to 800, Abbasid Caliphate established and Baghdad becomes Baghdad in Iraq. Currently the capital of Iraq is Baghdad. Baghdad becomes a major culture and the commercial center. 800 to 850, Khmer state founded in the Cambodia. Cambodia is the Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam in the east of the Myanmar. 850 to 900, first print book in China in 868. Between 950 to 1000, use of paper money in the China. 1000 to 150, Ibn Sina, a Persian doctor, writes a medical text that followed for century. In 1000 to 50, Muhammad of Ghazni raided the northwest. Al-Biruni travels to India. Raja Rajeshwara temple at the Thanjavur established. In 1050 to 1100, establishment of Turkish Empire by the Al-Arpasa in Asia, and in 1100 to 1150, first recorded display of firework in China. Kalhan's right with the Rajtarangini. It is also a ruler of India. 1150 to 1200, Angkor Empire, Cambodia at its height. 1180, temple complex at Angkor Wat. 1200 to 50, Genghis Khan consolidates power in 1206. Establishment of Delhi Sultanate in 1206. It is established. Firstly, the Delhi Sultanate, the slave density, then Tughlaq density, and so on. 1250 to 300, Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, became emperor of the China. Basically, Genghis Khan is the Mongol, and China constructed the Great Wall of China to get protection and to resist the Mongols. Amir Khusro, 1253 to 35, introduced new form of poetry and music. Sun Temple at the Konark. Konark is situated in the Odisha. In America and Australia, what is happening between 100 before Common Era to 1300 Common Era? So 100 to 150, there is not only change, we can got some stamps and other things. In 300 to 350 Common Era, state of Teotihuacan established in Mexico with the pyramid temples. Mayan ceremonial center developed of the astronomy pictorial script. Similarly, 950 to 1000, first cities built in the North America. Between 9 to 90, Maori navigator from Polynesia. Polynesia is the region which is in the east of Australia or part of the Oceania continent, and it is situated in east of Australia and west of Pacific Ocean. Discovered New Zealand. 1050 to 1100, sweet potato, originally from South America, grown in Polynesia Island. In India, potato came because of the Portuguese, and tobacco also became because of the Portuguese. Theme 2, an emperor across 3 continents. The Roman Empire covered a vast stretch of territory that included most of the Europe as we know it today, and a large part of the Fertile Crescent and North Africa. In this chapter, we shall look at the way this empire was organized, the political force that shaped its density, and the social groups into which peoples were divided. You will see that the empire embraced a wealth of local culture and the languages, that women had a strong legal position then and they do in many countries today, but also that much of the economy was run on slave labor, denying freedom to substantial numbers of persons. From the 15th century on, the empire fell apart in the west but remained intact with the exceptionally prosperous in the eastern half. The caliphate, which you will read about in the next chapter, built on the prosperity and inherited its urban and religious tradition. This is the photo of a papyrus scrolls. Roman historians have a rich collection of sources to go on, which we broadly divided into three groups: text, documents, material remains. Textual resources including histories of the period written by the contemporaries. These were usually called annals because the narrative was constructed on the year by year basis. Letters, speeches, sermons, laws, and so on. Documentary source included mainly inscriptions and the papyri. Inscriptions were usually cut on the stone, so a large number survive. In both Greek and Latin, the papyrus was a reed-like plant that grew along the bank of the Nile in Egypt and was processed to produce a writing material that was very widely used in the everyday life. Thousands of contracts, accounts, letters, and official documents survive on the papyrus and have been published by the scholars who are called papyrologists. Material remains included a very wide astronomy of the items that mainly archaeologists discovered. For example, through excavation and the field survey, for example, buildings, monuments, and other kinds of structure, poetry, coins, mosaics, even entire landscape. For example, through use of the aerial photography. Each of these sources can only tell us just so much about the past, and combining them can be a fruitful exercise. But how well this is done depend on the historian's skill. I'm drinking some water. Two powerful empires ruled over most of the Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East in the period between the birth of the Christ and early part of the 7th century, say down to the 630. The two empires were those of the Rome and Iran. The Romans and the Iranians were rivals and they fought against each other for much of their history. Their empires lay next to each other, separated only by a narrow strip of the land that ran along the river Euphrates. In this chapter, we shall be looking at the Roman Empire, but we shall also refer in passing to Roman's rival Iran. If you look at the map, you will see that the continent of Europe and Africa are separated by a sea that stretches all the way from Spain to the Syria in the east. This sea is called the Mediterranean Sea, and it was the region around the sea in the both direction, north as well as south. To the north, boundaries of empire were formed by the two great rivers, the Rhine and the Danube. To the south, by the huge expanse of Europe and North Africa map. This is Rhine Nimmer and the Danube River. Rhine and Danube originated from Germany. And it is Constantinople. It is Mediterranean. Sea is Syria is here, which is Rajasthan. Capital of Syria is Damascus, Turkey. And Constantinople, which is capital of at that time capital of Holy Roman Empire, and north of Africa. Red Sea, at that time Suez Canal is not constructed. Desert called the Sahara. This vast stretch of territory was the Roman Empire. Iran controlled the whole area south of the Caspian Sea down to the eastern Arabian and sometimes large part of the Afghanistan as well. These two superpowers have divided up most of the world. That the China called the Tai Chin, the Great Chin, roughly the West. The early empire. The Roman Empire was broadly be divided into two phases, early and the late, divided by the 3rd century as a sort of the historical watershed between them. In other words, the whole period down to the main part of the 3rd century can called the early empire, and the period after that the late empire. A major difference between the two superpowers and their respective empires was the Roman Empire was culturally much more diversified than that of Iran. The Persians and later of the Saracens, the dynasty that ruled Iran in this period, ruled over a population was largely Iranians. The Roman Empire, by contrast, was a mosaic of territories and culture that was chiefly bound together by a common system of government. Many languages were spoken in the empire, but for the purpose of administration, Latin and Greek were the mostly wide used. Indeed, the only languages the upper classes of the East spoke and they wrote in the Greek, those of the West in the Latin, and the boundary between in those broad languages area ran somewhere across the middle of the Mediterranean Sea between the African provinces of the Tripolitan, which was Latin speaking, and Gregorian speaking, which is Greek speaking. All those who lived in the empire were subject of a single ruler, the emperor, regardless of where they lived, in what language they spoke. The regime established by Augustus, the first empire in 27 before Common Era, was called the Principate. Although Augustus was the sole ruler and the only real source of authority, and the fiction was the kept alive that he was actually only the leading citizen, principe in Latin, not the absolute ruler. This was done out of the respect for the Senate, the body which had controlled Rome earlier in days when it was a republic. What is the meaning of republic? The republic was the name for a regime in which the reality of power lay with the Senate, a body dominated by a group of wealthy families who formed the nobility. In practice, the republic represented the government of the nobility, excised through the body called the Senate. The republic lasted from the 509 before Common Era to the 27 before Common Era, when it was the overthrown by the Octavian and adopted son and heir of the Julius Caesar, who later changed his name to Augustus. Membership of the Senate was for life, and wealth and the office holding counted for more than birth. The Senate had extended in the Rome for centuries and has been remained a body representing the aristocracy, that is the wealthiest family of Roman and had later Italian descents. Many landowners, most of the Roman historians that survive in Greek and Latin, were written by the peoples from a senatorial background. From this it is clear that the emperors were judged by how they believed towards the Senate. The post emperor were those who were hostile to the senatorial class, behaving with the suspicious of brutality and violence. Many senators yearned to go back to the days of the republic, but most must have realized that this was impossible. Next to the emperor and the senate, the other key institution of the imperial rule was the army. Unlike the army of the rivals in the Persia Empire, which was a conscripted means a conscripted army is one which is forcibly recruited. Military services is compulsory for the certain groups or categories of the population. Just like in conscripted army in Israel. You have to serve in army before attaining a certain age. It is compulsory for all peoples, and in South Korea it is a conscripted army where every people should have to serve in army for 2 to 3 years. That is where what is the rule of that country. The Roman had a paid professional army where soldiers had to put in the minimum of 25 years of the service. Indeed, the existence of a paid army was a distinguishing feature of the Roman Empire. The army was the largest single organized body in the empire, 6 lakh by the 4th century. It certainly had the power to determine the fate of emperors. The soldiers would constantly agitate for better wages and service conditions. The agitations often took the form of mutinies. If the soldiers felt let down by the generals or even the emperors, again, our picture of the Roman army depends largely on the way they were portrayed by the historians with the senatorial sympathizes. The Senate hated the feared the army because it was a source of often unpredictable violence, especially in the tense condition of the 3rd century when government was forced to tax more heavily to pay for its mounting military expenditure. To sum up, the empire, the aristocracy, and the army were the three main players in the political history of the empire. The success of individual empire depend on their control of the army, and whenever the army were divided, the result usually was civil war. What is civil war means? Civil war was referred to the army struggle for power within the same country in contrast to conflict between different countries. Except for one notorious year 69 Common Era when four emperors mounted the throne in the quick succession. The first 2 centuries were the whole free from civil war and in this sense relatively stable. Succession to the throne was based as far as possible on the family descent, either natural or adoptive. And even the army was strong wedded to this principle. For example, Tiberius in 14 to 37 Common Era, the second is the longest line of the Roman emperor, was not the natural son of Augustus, the ruler who founded the Principate, but Augustus adopted him to ensure a smooth transition. External warfare was also much less common in the first 2 centuries. The empire inherited by the Tiberius from Augustus was already so vast that further expansion was felt to be unnecessary. In fact, the Augustus age is remembered for the peace it ushered in after decades of the internal strife and centuries of the military conquest. The only major campaign of the expansion in the early empire was Trajan's fruitless occupation of territory across the Euphrates. In the year 113 to 17 Common Era, abandoned by his successor, the emperor of Trajan's dream upon a conquest of India. Then, after winter 15 to 16 in Antioch, marked by a great earthquake in 116 Common Era, Trajans marched down the Euphrates to Ctesiphon, the Persian capital, and then to the head of the Persian Gulf. There, the historians Cassius Dio describe him looking longingly at the merchant ship setting off for India and wishing that he was as young as Alexander. Means he wanted to conquer the India, but he could not able to because he was too old. I'm drinking water. The Near East. From the perspective of someone who lived in the Roman Mediterranean, this referred to all the territory east of the Mediterranean, chiefly the Roman provinces of Syria, Palestine, and the Mesopotamia, and a looser sense the surrounding territories, for example, Arab. Much more characteristic was the gradual extension of Roman direct rule. This was accomplished by the absorbing a whole series of dependent kingdoms into the Roman provincial territories. The first Near East was full of such kingdoms, but by the early 2nd century, those which lay west of the Euphrates towards Roman territory had disappeared, swallowed up by Rome. Incidentally, some of these kingdoms were exceedingly wealthy. For example, Herod's kingdom yielded with the equivalent of 5.4 million denarii per year, equal to the 1,25,000 kgs of gold per year. The denarii was a Roman silver coin containing about 4.5 grams of pure silver. In fact, except for Italy, which was not considered a province in this century, all the territories of the empire was organized in the provinces and subject to taxation. At its peak, the 2nd century, the Roman Empire stretched from Scotland to the borders of the Armenia, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. It is a Caucasus range. Caucasus range of mountain is situated in these countries, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. From the Sahara to the Euphrates, some beyond given that was the no government in the modern sense to help them to run things. You may well ask how was possible for an emperor to cope with the control and the administration of such a vast, diverse set of territories. With a population of some 60 million in the mild 2nd century, the answer lies in the urbanization of the empire. The great urban centers that lined the shore of the Mediterranean, Carthage, Alexandria, Antioch, which brightest among them, were the true bedrock of imperial system. It was through the cities that government was able to tax the provincial countryside, which generated much of the wealth of the empire. What this means is that the local upper caste actively collaborated with the Roman states in administrating their own territories and raising taxes from them. In fact, one of the most interesting aspects of the Roman political history is the dramatically shift in the power between the Italy and the provinces. Through the 2nd and the 3rd centuries, it was the provincial upper classes who supplied most of the cadre that the government and the provinces and command the army. They came to form a new elite of administrators and military commanders who became more powerful than the senatorial class because they had to backing up the emperors. As this new group emerged, the emperor's Galerians in 253 to 68 Common Era consolidated their rise to the power in the excluding senators from the military commanders. We are told that Galerians forbade senators from serving in the army or having access to it in order to prevent control of the empire from falling into their hand. It is a picture of the Port du Grand near Nimes, France. It is situated in France. Built in 1st century before Common Era, Roman engineers built massive aqueduct over 3 continents to carry water. To sum up, in the late year 2nd and early 3rd century, the army and administration were increasingly drawn from the provinces as citizenship spread to this region and was no longer confined to Italy, but individual of Italians originated continued to dominate the Senate at least till the 3rd century. When senators of the provincial origin became a majority, these trends reflected the general decline of the Italy within the empire, both political and economical, and the rise of the new elites in the wealthier and the more urbanized part of the Mediterranean, such as the south of Spain, Africa, and the east. A city in the Rome sense was the urban center with its own magistrates, cities council, and a territory containing villages which were under its jurisdiction. That one city could not be the territory of another city, but villages almost always were. Villages could be upgraded to the status of the cities and vice versa, usually as a mark of imperial favor or the opposite. One crucial advantage of living in a city was simple that it might be better provided fall during food shortage and even famines than the countryside. Dr. Gaydon on how Roman cities treated the countryside. Uh, Dr. Gillen on how Roman cities treated the countryside. The famine prevalent for many successive years in many provinces was clearly displayed for men of any understanding the effect of malnutrition in generating illness. The city dwellers, as it was their customs to collect and store enough grains for whole of the year immediately after the harvest, carried off all the wheat, barley, bean and lentils and left to the peasants various kinds of pulses. After taking quite a large portion of these to the city, after consuming what was left in the course of the winter, the country people had to resort to unhealthy foods in the spring. They ate twigs and shoots of the tree and bushes and bulb and roots of the inedible plants. This is so wrong. Public baths were a striking feature of the Roman urban life. When one Iranian ruler tried to introduce them into Iran, he encountered the wrath of clergy there. Water was the scared element. To use it for public bathing may to be seen a discretion to them, and urban population also enjoy a much higher level of entertainment. For example, one calendar tells us the Sparta Kula show filed no less than 176 days of the year. It is picture of architecture at the Roman cantonment town of the Bendonissa in modern Switzerland, 1st century Common Era, used for the military drill and for staging entertainments for the soldier. It is a pond bathing center. The 3rd century crisis. If the 1st and 2nd century were by the large period of peace, prosperity and economic expansion, the 3rd century brought the first major signs of eternal strains. From 230s, an empire itself fighting on the several fronts simultaneously in Iran, a new and more aggressive dynasty emerged in 225. They called themselves the Sennacians, and within just 15 years were expanding rapidly in the direction of Euphrates. In a famous rock inscription cut in the 3 languages, Shahpur first and the Iranian ruler and claim he annihilated a Roman army of 60,000 and even captured the eastern capital of Antioch. Meanwhile, a whole series of Germanic tribes, or rather tribal confederacies, most notably the Alemannis, the Franks and the Goths, began to move against the Rhine and the Danube frontier, and the whole period from 233 Common Era to 280 Common Era saw repeated invasion of a whole line of provinces that stretch from the Black Sea to the Alps mountain range in Germany and southern Germany. The Romans were forced to abandon much of the territories beyond the Danube River, which is originated from, while the emperor of this period were constantly in the field against the Romans called barbarians. The rapid succession of the emperors in the 3rd century, 25 empires in 47 years, is an obviously symptoms of the strain faced by the emperor in this period. General literacy and culture. One of the more modern features of the Roman society was the widespread prevalence of the nuclear family. Adult sons did not live with their families, and it was exceptionally for adult brothers to share a common household. On other hand, slaves were included in the families as the Roman understood this. By the late Republic, the 1st century before Common Era, the typical form of marriage was one of where the wife did not transfer to her husband's authority but retain full right in the property of the natal family. while the woman's dowry went to the husband for the duration of marriage. The woman remained a primary heir of her father and became an independent property owner on her father's death. Thus, Roman women enjoy a considerable legal right in owning and managing property. Managing property. In other words, in law, the married couples was not only financially entities, but two and the wives enjoyed completely legal independence. Divorce are relatively easy and needed no more than a notice of intent to dissolve the marriage by entire husband or wife. On the other hand, whereas males married in their late 20s and early 30s, women were married off in the late 20s and early 20s, late teens and early 20s. So there was an age gap between husband and wife, and this would have encouraged a certain inequalities. Marriages were generally arranged, and there is no doubt that women were often subjected to domination by their husband. Augustine. What is Augustine? Saint Augustine in 354 Common Era to 430 Common Era was bishop of the North African city of Hippo from 396 and a towering figure in the intellectuals history of the church. Bishop were the most important religious figure in the Christianity community and often very powerful. Augustine, the great Catholic bishop who spent most of his life in the North Africa, tell us that his mother was regularly beaten by his father and the most other wives in a small time where he grew up had similarly bruises to show. Finally, the father has substantial legal control over their children, sometimes to shocking degrees. For example, a legal power of life and death is exposing unwanted childs by leaving them out of the cold to die. The use of okay, it is not. What about literacy? It is certain that literacy of the casual literacy means the use of reading and writing in everyday, often trivial and contest. Those who read and write anything is called literate. Varied greatly between the different part of the empire. For example, in Pompeii, which was the born in the volcanic eruption in 79 Common Era, this is a strong evidence of widespread casual literacy. Ball on the main street of Pompeii often carried advertisements, and graffiti were found all over the city. In contrast, in Egypt, where hundreds of the papyrs survive, most formal documents such as contrast were usually written by the professional scribes, and they often tell us that X or Y is unable to read and write. But even here, literacy was certainly more widespread among certain categories such as soldier, army officer, and estate managers. The cultural diversity of empire was reflected in the many ways and at many levels. In vast diversity of religion, cults, and the local dignities, the popularity of the languages that were broken, the styles of dress and the costume, the food people eat, their form of social organization, tribal and non-tribal. Even their partners of the settlement, Aramaic was the dominated languages group of Near East. At least west of the Euphrates, Coptic was the spoken in Egypt. Punic and Berber is the North Africa. Celtic in Spain and the northwest, but most of the linguistic culture was purely oral, at least until a script was invented for them. Aramaic, for example, only began to be written as late as 5th century, whereas there was already a Coptic. What is the one of the finest of these graphene found on the walls of the Pompeii says, wall, I admire you or not collapsing in ruins when you have to support so much boring writing on you. A picture of mosaic in Edessa, 2nd century Common Era. The Syriac inscriptions suggest that those depicted are the wife of King Abgar and her family. A picture of Pompeii, a wine merchant dining room, its wall decorated with the scenes depiction mythical animals. Translation of Bible by the middle of the 3rd century. Elsewhere, the spread of Latin displaced the written form of languages that were other widespread. This happened notably the Celtic, which ceased to be written after the 1st century. Economic expansion. The empire has substantial economic infrastructure of harbors, mines, quarries, brickyards, olive oil factories, etc. Wheat, wine, and olive oil were traded and consumed in the huge quantity, and they came mainly from the Spain, the garlic provinces, North Africa, Egypt, and to lesser extent Italy, where conditions were best for the crop. Liquids like wine and olive oil were transported in container called amphorae. The fragments and the shards of very large number of these survival Monte Testaccio in Rome is said to contain two remnant of over 50 million vessels, and has been possible for archaeologists to reconstruct the precious shape of these containers, tell us what they carried, and say exactly where they are made up by examining the clay content and matching the find with the clay pits throughout the Mediterranean. In this way, we can now say with some confidence with the Spanish oil love. To take just one example, was a vast commercial enterprise that reached its peak in the year 114 to 116. The Spanish olive oil of the period was mainly carried in a container called Dressel 20. After the archaeologists who first established its form, if find of the Dressel 20 are widely scattered across sites in the Mediterranean, this suggests that Spanish olive oil circulated very widely indeed. By using such evidence, the remains of the amphorae of the different kinds of their distribution maps, archaeologists are able to show the Spanish producers succeeded in the capturing market for olive oil from their Italian counterpart. This would only happen if the Spanish producers supply a better quality oil at lower price. In other words, the big landowners from different regions competed with each other for the control of the main market for goods they produced. The successor of Spanish oil growers was the repeated by the North African producer. Olive estates in this part of the empire dominated production through most of the 3rd and 4th centuries. Later, after 425, North Africa dominance was broken by the East. In the later 5th and the 6th centuries, the Aegean, South Asian Minor Turkey, currently Istanbul, Syria and Palestine became major exporter of wine and olive oil, and containers from Africa show a dramatically reduced presence on the Mediterranean market. Beside this, broad movement and the prosperity of individual region rose and fell depending on the how effective they would organize the production and transport of a particular goods. On the quality of those goods, the empire included many regions that had a reputation for exceptionally fertility. Campania in Italy, Sicilia and Fagium in Egypt, Gallium Benzacium in Tunisia, a southern Gaul called the Gallia Narbonensis, or the wealthiest part of the Europe according to writers like Strabo and Pliny. The best kind of wines came from the Campania, Sicily and Byzantium exported large quantity of wheat to Rome. Galia was dense cultivated. Every inch of the soil has been cultivated by the inhabitants, wrote the historian Josephus. The Spanish oil came mainly from the numerous estates, fundi, along the bank of the river of the Guadalquivir in the south of Spain. On other hand, larger expanse of the Roman territory were in the much less advanced states. For example, transhumance. What is the meaning of transhumance? Is the herdsman regular annual movement between the higher mountain region and the lower lying grounds in the search of the pasture for sheep and other flocks. Was transhuman was widespread in the countryside of Numidia, modern Algeria, in north of Africa. These pastoral and the semi-nomadic communities were often these pastorals and semi-nomadic communities were often on the move, carrying their expanded in the North Africa, and the pastures of those communities was drastically reduced and their movements more tightly regulated. Even in Spain, the north was much less developed and inhabited largely by a Celtic speaking peasantry that lived in the hilltop villages called Castella. When we think of the Roman Empire, we should never forget these differences. We should always be careful not to imagine that because this was the ancient world, their forms of culture and economic life were necessarily backward or primitive. On the contrary, diversified application of water power around the Mediterranean Sea, as well as the advanced in the water power mining technology, the use of hydraulic mines techniques in the Spanish gold and silver mines, and the gigantic industrial scale on which those mines were worked on the first and second century, with the level of outputs that would not reach again till the 19th century, some 1700 years later. The existence of well-organized commercial and the banking network, and the widespread use of money, and all indication of how much we tend to underestimate the sophistication of the Roman economy. This raises the issue of labor and of the use of slavery. Controlling your curse. Slavery was an institution deeply rooted in the ancient world, both in the Mediterranean and the Near East, and not even Christianity when it emerged and triumphed as the state religion. In the 4th century, seriously challenged this institution. It does not follow that the bulk of the labor in the Roman economy was performed by slaves. That may have been true of large part of the Italy in the Republic period under Augustus. There were still 3 million slaves in the total Italian population of 7.5 million, but it was no longer true of the empire as a whole. Slaves were an instrument, and at least one Roman agriculture writer advised landowner against using them in contest where too many might be required, for example for harvest, or where their health could be damaged, for example by malaria. These considerations were not based on any sympathy for the slaves but on hard economic calculation. On the other hand, if Roman upper class were often brutally towards the slave, ordinary people did sometimes so much more oppression. See what one historian say about a famous incident that occurs in the region of Nero. As warfare becomes less widespread with the establishment of the peace in the 1st century, the supply of slaves tended to decline, and user of the slaves labor thus had to turn either to the slave breeding. What is slave breeding? The practice of encouraging female slaves and their partners to have more children who would be forced also to be slave. Or the cheaper substitution such as wages labor, which was more easily dispensable. In fact, free labor was extensively used in the public works at Rome. Preciously became an extensive use of slave labor would have been too expensive. Unlike hired workers, slaves have to be fed and maintained throughout the year, which increased the cost of holding this kind of labors. This is probably why the slaves are not widely founded in agriculture or the later period, at least not in the eastern provinces. On other hand, they are freedmen. This is slaves who had been set free by their masters, were extensively used as the business managers, where obviously they were not required in the large numbers. Masters often gave their slaves or freedom capital to the run business on their behalf or even businesses of their own. The Roman agricultural writers paid a great deal of attention to the management of the labors. Columella, a first century writer who came from the south of the Spain, recommended that landowners should keep a reserve stock of implemented and tools, twice as many as needed, so that production could be continuous for loss in the slave labor. The extended the coast time, there was a general presumption. Longing and many activities shown in this. Among employers that without supervision, New Yorkers no workers would ever get done, so supervision was paramounted for both free workers and slave. To make supervision easier, workers would sometimes grouped into gangs or smaller teams. Cumela recommended squads of 10, claiming it easier to tell who was putting in efforts and who was not in work group of this size. This shows a detailed consideration of the management of labor. Pliny the Elder, the author of very famous natural history, condemned the use of slave gangs as the worst method of organizing production, mainly because slaves who works in gang are usually chained together by their feet. All this looks draconian, but we should remember that most factories in the world today enforce similar principle of labor control. Indeed, some industrial established in the empire enforced even tighter control. The elder Pliny described conditions in the frankincense. What is the meaning of draconian? It all looks like draconian. Draconian means harsh, so called because of an early 6th century before Common Era Greek lawmaker called Draco, who prescribed death as the penalty for most crimes. Frankincense, the European name for aromatic resin used in the incense and the perfumes. It is the tapped from the boswellia tree by the slashing the bark and allowing the excluded resin to harden. The best quality frankincense came from the Arabian Peninsula. Frankincense factories, officines of Alexandria, where he tells us no amount of supervision seems to suffice. A seal is put on the workers' aprons. They have to wear a mask or a net with a close mesh on their head, and before they are allowed to leave the premise, they have to take off all their cloth. Agriculture laborers must have been fatiguing and disliked, for a famous edict of early 3rd century referred to the Egyptian peasants deserting their villages in order not to engage in agriculture work, and the same was probably true of the most factories and workshops. A law of 398 referred to the workers being branded so they could organize if and when they run away and try to hide. Many private laborers cast their arrangement with the workers in the form of debt contract, and to able to claim that their employees and were to debt them and thus ensure tightened control over them. An early 2nd century writers tell us thousands surrenders themselves to work in the servitude although they are free. In other words, a lot of poorer family went into debt bondage in order to survive. From one of the recently discovered letters of the Augustine, we learned that the parent sometimes sold their children into servitude for a period of 25 years. Augustine asked a lawyer friend of his whether these children could be liberated once his father died. Rural independence was even more widespread. To take just one example, in the Great Jewish Revolt of 66 Common Era, Jewish Revolt of 66, a rebellion in the Judea against the Roman domination, which was the ruthlessly suppressed by the Romans in what she called the Jewish War. Jewish Revolt of 66 Common Era revolutionary destroy the moneylenders' bonds to win the popular support. Again, we should be careful not to conclude that the bulk of labors on coincides in this way. The late 5th century emperor Anastasius attracted labor. Anastasius built the western frontier city of Dara in less than 3 weeks by attracting laborers from all over the east by offering high wages. From the papyri, we can even form some estimate of how widespread wages labors had become in part of the Mediterranean by 6th century, especially in East. Social hierarchies. Let us stand back from the detail now and try to get a sense of the social structure of the empire. Tatius described the leading social group of the early empires as follows: senators, patriarchs, leads, fathers. Leading members of the equestrian class, the respectable section of the people, those attract to the great houses, and unkept lower classes, plebs, soldiers, who he tell us were addicted to the circus and the theatrical displays, and finally the slaves in the early 3rd century, when the Senate numbered roughly 1000, approximately half of the senators still came from the Italian family. By the late empire, which started with a region of the Constantine I in the early part of the 4th century, the first two groups mentioned by the Tatius and the senators and the equites had emerged into a unified and expanded aristocracy, and at least half of the all families were of African and Eastern origin. This late Roman aristocracy was enormously wealthy, but in many ways less powerful than the purely military elites, who came almost entire from the non-aristocrats' background. The middle class now consists of the considerable mass of persons connected with the imperial service in the bureaucracy and army, but also the more prosperous merchant and farmers, of whom there were many of in the eastern provinces. Tatius described this respectable middle class as client of the great senatorial houses. Now it was chiefly government services and dependence on the state that sustained many of these families. Below them were the vast mass of the lower classes, known collectively as humiliation lit lower. They comprised a rural labor force of which many were permanently employed on the large estate. Workers in the industry and mining established migrant workers who supplied much of labors or grains and olive harvest, and for the building industry, self-employed artisans who, it was said, for better fed than wages labor. A large masses of the casual laborers, especially in big cities, and of course the many thousands of slaves that were still found all over the Western Empire in particular. One writer of the early 5th century, the historian Olympiodorus, who was also ambassador, tell us the aristocracy based on the city of Rome drew annual income of the 4,000 pounds of gold. LBS is the unit of pound, pound of gold. from their estate, not counting the produce they consumed directly. The monastery system of the late empire broken with the silver based currency of the first 3 centuries because the Spanish silver mines were exhausted and government ran out of sufficient stock of the metal to support a stable coinage in silver. Constantine founded the new monetary system on gold, and there was vast amount of this in circulation throughout late antiquity. The late Roman bureaucracy, both the higher and the middle Alions, was the comparatively affluent group because it drew the bulk of its salary in gold and invested much of this in the buying of assets like land. There was of course also a great deal of corruption, especially in judicial system and in administration of the military supplies. The extortion of the higher bureaucracy and greed of the provincial governors were prohibible, but government intervened repeatedly to curb these forms of corruption. We only know about them in the first place because of law that tried to put an end of them, and because historians and other members of the intelligentsia denounced such practices. The element of criticism is a remarkable feature of the classic world. The Roman state was an authoritarian regime. In other words, dissents were rarely tolerated and government usually responded to protest with violence, especially in cities of the east where people were often fearless in the making fun of the emperors. Yet, a strong tradition of Roman law had emerged by the 4th century, and this acted as a brake, and even the most fearsome emperors are not free to do whatever they liked, and the law were actively used to protect the civil rights. That is why in later 4th century it was possible for the powerful bishops like Ambrose to confront equally powerful emperors when they were excessively harsh or repressive in their handling of the civil population. Late antiquity. We shall conclude this chapter by looking at the cultural transformation of the Roman world. In its final century, late antiquity is the term now used in describe the final fascinating period in the evolution and breakup of the Roman Empire, and refer broadly to the 4th to the 7th century. The 4th century itself was the considerable ferment, both cultural and economic. At the cultural level, the period saw momentous development in the religious life, with the Emperor Constantine deciding to make Christianity the official religion, and with the rise of Islam in the 7th century. But there was equally important changes in the structure of the state that began with the Emperor Diocletian in 284 to 307 Common Era, and it was the best to start with the dense overexpansion had led decline to cut back by amending territories. With little strategy or economic value, Diocletian fortified the frontiers, reorganized provincial boundaries, and separated civilians from military function, granting greater autonomy to military commanders, deuce, who now became a more powerful group. Constantine consolidated some of these changes, were added other of his own. His chief innovations were in the monastery sphere, where he introduced a new denomination, the solidus, a coin of 4.5 grams of pure gold that would in fact outlast the Roman Empire itself. Solidi were minted on the very large scale, and their circulation ran into millions. Another area of innovation was the creation of the second capital at Constantinople, at the site of modern Istanbul in Turkey and previously called Byzantium, surrounded of the three sides of the sea. As the new capital required a new senate, the 4th century was a period of rapid expansion of governing classes. monetary stability and an expanding population stimulated mo- monetary stability and the expanding population stimulated economic growth. An archaeological record shows considerable investment in the rural establishment and including industrial installation like oil presses and glass factories. In newer technology such as screw presses and multiple water mills and revival of the long distance trade with the east. All this carried over into a strong urban prosperity that was marked by a new form of architecture and aggregated sense of luxury. The ruling elites were wealthier and more powerful than ever before. In Egypt, hundreds of papyri survived from these later centuries, and they show us a relatively affluent society where money was in extensive use and ruler estate generated vast income in the gold. For example, Egypt contributed taxes of over 2.5 million solidi a year, roughly 35,000 pounds of gold per year. In the region of Justinian in the 6th century, indeed a large part of near eastern countryside were more developed and dense settled in the 5th and 6th century than they would be even in the 19th century. This is the social background against which we should set up the cultural development of this period. The traditional religious culture of the classic world, both Greek and Roman, had been polytheist. This is it involved a multi-city of that included both Roman and Italian god like Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, and Mars, as well as numerous Greek and Eastern deities worshipped in thousands of temples, shrines, and sanctuaries throughout the empire. Polytheist has no common name or label to describe themselves. The other great religious tradition in the empire was Judaism, but Judaism was not a monolithic. Monolithic मतलब worship of a single. Monolithic literally a large block of stone. Liths are the stones originated from the lavas, but the expression is used to refer anything. For example, a society or the culture lack of variety and in all types on all of the same types. Monolithic either, and there was a great deal of diversity within the Jewish community of late antiquity. Thus the Christianization. What is Christianization? Christianization, the process which Christianity spread among the different groups of population and became the dominant religion. Christianization of the empire in the 4th and the 5th centuries was a gradual and complex process. Polytheism did not appear overnight, especially in the western provinces, where the Christian bishops' wages are running battle against the belief and the practices they condemned more than the Christianity laity did. Boundaries between religious communities were much more fluid in the 4th century than they would become in thanks to the repeated efforts of religious leaders. The powerful bishops who now led to the church to rein in their followers and enforced a more rigid set of belief and practice. The general prosperity was especially marked in the east, where population was spreading till the 6th century. Despite the impact of the plague which affected the Mediterranean in the 1540s, in the west by the contrast the empire fragmented politically as a Germanic group from the north, Gothang, Vandalas, Lombards, etc., took over all the major provinces and established kingdoms that are best described as post-Roman. The most important of these were that the Visigoths in Spain, destroyed by the Arab between 711 to 720, that of the Franks in the Gaul between 511 to 687 Common Era, and that of the Lombards in Italy 568 to 744. These kingdoms were foreshadow the beginning of the different kinds of world that is usually called medieval. In the east, where the empire remained united and region of Justin in high water mark of prosperity and imperial ambition. Justinian. This is the picture of Colosseum built in the 79 Common Era where gladiators fought wild beasts. It could accommodate 60,000 people. Recapture Africa from the Vandals in 533, but his recovery of Italy from the Ostrogoths left that country devastated and paved the way for the Lombard invasion. By the early 7th century, the war between Rome and Iran had flared up again, and the Sassanians, who had ruled Iran since the 3rd century, launched a whole-scale invasion of all the major eastern provinces, including Egypt. When Byzantine, as the Roman Empire was now increasingly known, recovered these provinces in the 1620s, it was just a few years away, literally, from the 5 major blows which came this time from the southeast. The expansion of Islam now it's began in the Arab and has been called the greatest political revolution ever to occur in the history of the ancient world. By 1640, barely 10 years after the Prophet Muhammad's death, large part of both the Eastern Roman and the Sasanian Empire had fallen to the Arabs in the series of stunning confrontations. However, we should bear in the mind that those conquests, which eventually a century later extended as far afield as Spain, Sindh and Central Asia, began in fact with the subjugation of Arab tribes by the emerging Islamic State first within Arab and in the Syria desert, and so on the fringes of Iraq. As we will see in the theme 4, the unification of Arabic Peninsula and its numerous tribes was the key factor behind the territorial expansion of Islam. Ruler events in 27 before Common Era to 17, Augustus, first Roman emperor. In 27, a principalate founded by Octavian and now called himself Augustus. In 24 to 29 Common Era, life of elder Pliny dies in the volcanic eruption of Vesuvius. Vesuvius is a small island currently below the Italy active volcano, which also burns the Roman town of Pompeii. 1437 to Tiberius Tiberius 98 to 107. 1660 to 17, the Great Jewish Revolt and capture of Jerusalem by Roman forces. In between 115, greatest extent of Roman Empire falling, Trojan conquest in the east. Trajan in 117 to 38, Hadrian. 112, all the free inhabitants of the empire transformed into Roman citizens. 193 to 211, Septimius Severus. 2024, new dynasty founded in Iraq called the Sassanians after the Enstar Sultans. 250, Persian invaded Roman territory west of the Euphrates. In 241 to 72, region of the Saspur first in the Iraq. In 258, Cyprian Turkey, Cyprus. Cyprus is the Cyprian region. Below the Turkey, an island country is Cyprus, whose capital is Nicosia currently. Cyprus bishops of the Carthage executed. In 260s, Galenian reorganized the army. In 253 to 68, Galenians. In 273, Carvenese cities of the Plum era destroyed by Romans. In 297, Deconian reorganized army into 100 provinces. In 284 to 305, the tragedy Diocletian main ruler. In 312, Constantine converted to the Christianity. From 312 to 337, Constantine. 324, Constantine, now sole ruler of empire, found city of the Constantinople. 309 to 79, region of the Sapur second in Iran. 354 to 480, life of Augustine, bishop of Hippo. 378, Gothas inflicted crushing defeat in the Roman army to Adrianople. 408 to 50, 320, destruction of the Sabrinian temple of the Serapis at Alexandria. 308 to 350, Theodosius II, compiler of the famous Theodosian Code. 310, sack of the Roman by the Visigoths. And 328, Vandals capture Africa. 334 to 53, empire of Attila and Huns. 490 to 418, Anastasius. 493, Ostrogoths established kingdom in Italy. 533 to 50, recovery of Africa and Italy by the Justinian. 527 to 65. 547, outbreak of the bubonic plague, bubonic plague. 547 to 70. 537 to 39, region of the Khusro first in Iraq. 568, Lombards invaded Italy. 610 to Heraclius. 570, birth of Muhammad. 614 to 19, Persian ruler Khusro II invaded and occupies eastern Roman territories. 622, Muhammad and the companion leave Makkah for Medina. 633-42, first and the crucial phase of Arab conquest. Muslim armies take Syria, Palestine, Egypt, Iraq and the past of the Iran. 661 to 750, Umayyad dynasty in the Syria. 698, Arabs capture the Carthage. 711, Arab invasion of the Spain. Now this is the picture of mosaic at the Ravenna. 547, Common Era, showing Emperor Justinian. Answer in the brief: if you had lived in the Roman Empire, where would be rather have you lived, in the town or in the countryside? Explain why. Questions. Okay, if you lived in the Roman Empire, answer: I would like to live in the towns of the Roman Empire, as it has better source of earning and facility to fight with the natural calamities, matlab आपदा, that occurred frequently. In Roman cities, there was such a structure were quite strong to fight with the daily lives problem, because towns are coming under the territory of city and they had been aided by the people who belong to political and business related fields. Question 2. Compile a list of some of the towns, cities, rivers, seas and provinces mentioned in this chapter and try to find them in on maps, then you see something about any three of items in the list you have compiled. Continents are Europe, North Africa island, Sicily island, Italy, river Nile river, Germany, Nile river in the longest river in the world, which is Victoria Lake to Egypt and fall in the Mediterranean Sea, and Rhine river in Germany, Danube river in Germany, Sindh rivers, Mediterranean Sea between Africa and Europe, Caspian Sea, Central Asia, Black Sea. Currently, war is going on in Ukraine. Aegean Sea, below the Italy, below and the east of the Italy, provinces Gaul, Numida, Tunisia, Macedonia. Macedonia is currently a country. Tunisia is currently also a country. Towns and cities: Constantinople, currently Istanbul, part of the Naples, Damascus, capital of Syria currently, Alexandria, situated in the somewhere around in Syria, and Rome currently in Italy. See description of three compound compiled in these east. Rivers help in the providing irrigation facilities for agriculture. Seas and ocean help in the promoting of trade and the commerce. Town and cities were the main center of economic and social and political activities of the empire. Question 3. Imagine that you are a Roman housewife preparing a shop list for the household requirement. What would be on the list? As Roman housewife, I would like to include the following item while preparing a shop list for household requirements: Roman glass, paintings, curtain, kitchen appliances, bedsheet, cushion covers, toys, furniture, and other modern appliances of daily life. 4. Why do you think the Roman government stopped coining in silver, and which metal did it begin to use for the production of coinage? However, answer: the Roman government stopped coining in silver because the Spanish silver mine became empty, thus causing dearth of the silver in the Roman Empire. Now the Roman government began to use gold for the production of the coinage. Question 5. Suppose the Emperor Trajan had actually managed to conquer India and Romans had to be the country for several centuries. In what ways do you think India might be different today? Is he remembered as successful soldier emperor who presided over the greatest military expansion in Indian history, leading the empire to attain its maximum territorial extended by time of his death. Is he known for the philanthropic rule, overseeing extensive public building programs and implementing social welfare policy, which earned him an enduring reputation as the second of the 5 good emperors who presided over the era of peace and prosperity in the Mediterranean world? As per the over passage, we can conclude if India has been conquered by the Trajan, he would have been the greatest ruler and extended philanthropic rule all over the India. There must be an absence of democratic idea and democratic rights in India. The division of society will be on basis of Roman society, currently on the caste basis. Question 6. Go through the chapter carefully and pick out some basic feature of Roman society and economy which you think it could be quite modern. We found that Roman society, women are quite financially independent in spite of getting married, but got shared of property from her natal house. It was the main feature of Roman society. This feature shows us that the Roman were household a strong status in the society. Another modern feature we found from the Roman economy was that there were very strong trading relation from across the Roman Empire provinces, which show that Roman economy was also very strong for provided the revenue to its government. Nomadic tribes. Theme 3, nomadic tribes. The term nomadic empires. The term nomadic empires can appear contradictory. Nomads are arguably quintessential foreigners organized in family assemblies with a relatively undifferentiated economic life and rudimentary system of political organization. The term empire, on the other hand, carried with it the sense of a material location, a stability driven from the complex social and economical structure and the governance of the extensive territorial dominion through an elaborated administrative system. But the juxtapositions on which these definitions were framed may be of too narrow and are historically conceived. They certainly collapsed when we study some imperial formation constructed by the nomadic groups. In theme 4, we study state formation in the central Islamic land whose origin lay in the Bedouin nomadic tradition of the Arabian Peninsula. This chapter study a different group of nomads, the Mongols of the Southern Asia, who established a transcontinental empire under the leadership of Genghis Khan, straddling Europe and Asia during the 13th and the 14th century. Relatively to the agrarian-based empire formation in the China, the neighboring nomads of the Mongolia may be inhabited a number less complex social and economical world, but the Central Asian nomadic societies were not insulated islands that were the impervious to the historical change. These societies interacted had a impact on the learned from the larger world of which they are very much a part. This chapter study the manner in which the Mongols under Genghis Khan adapted their strategy, traditional social and the political customs to create a fearsome military machine and a sophisticated method of governance. The challenge of the ruling a dominion spanning a millage of the people, economies and the confessional system meant that the Mongols could not simply impose their stupid tradition over their recently annexed territory. They innovated their compromised, creating a nomadic empire that had a huge impact on the history of the Eurasia, even as it changed the character and the composition of their own society forever. The steppe dwellers themselves usually produced no literature on our knowledge of nomadic society comes mainly from the chronicles, travelogies and the documents produced by the city-based literatures. These authors often produced extremely inaugurated based reports of the nomadic life. The imperial success of the Mongols, however, attracted many literary. Some of them produced travelogies of their evidences. Others stayed to serve Mongol master. These individuals came from a variety of background: Buddhist, Confucians, Christian, Turkish and Muslim. Although not always familiar with the Mongol customs, many of them produced sympathetic account, even ideology that challenged the complicated, the otherwise hostile city-based trade against the steppe Mordwaras. The history of the Mongols therefore provide interesting details to the question and the manner in which sedentary societies usually characterized nomads are primitive barbarians. Barbarians means the term barbarians is derived from the Greek barbosa, barbaros, which learned a non-Greek someone whose language sounded like a randomized noise, bar. In the Greek text, barbarians were depicted like the children, unable to speak or reason properly, crowded, inflamed, luxurious, cruel, slothful, greedy, and the political, unable to govern themselves. The stereotype passed to the Romans, who used the term for the Germanic tribes and Gauls and the Huns. The Chinese had different terms for the steppen barbarians, but none of them carried a positive meaning. Uncivilized people, barbarians, uncivilized people, simple words. Perhaps the most valuable research on the Mongols was done by the Russian scholar starting in the 18th and the 19th century as the Tsarist regime consolidated its control over Central Asia. This work was produced with a colonial meaning and the largest survey noted produced by the traveler, soldier merchants and the antiquarian scholars in the early 20th century. After the extension of Soviet republics in the region, a new Marxist historiography argued that the prevalent mode of the production determined the nature of the social relation. It placed Genghis Khan and the emerging Mongol Empire with a scale of the human evolution that was witnessing a transition from a tribal to a feudal mode of production, from a relatively class-named society to one where there were wide differences between the lord and the owners of the land and the peasants. Despite following such a deterministic interpretation of the history, excellent research on the Mongol languages, their society and culture was carried out by the scholars such as Boyos Yekoslovakia, Vladimirstov, others such as Vasily Vladimirovich Bartold did not quite tone of the official line. At a time when the Stalinistic regime was the extremely wary of the region nationalism, Bartold sympathetic and the positive achievement of the career and achievement of the Mongols under Genghis Khan and his successors got him into the trouble with the censors. It severely curtailed the circulation of work of the scholar, and it was the only in the 1960s, during and after the more liberal Khrushchev era, that his writings were published in the 9 volumes. The transcontinental span of the Mongol Empire also meant that the sources available in the scholars are written in a vast number of languages. Perhaps the most cruel are the source in the Chinese, Mongolian, Persian and Arabic, but vital materials are also available in Italian, Latin, French and Russian. Often same text was produced in 2 languages with the different content. For example, Mongolian and Chinese version of the earliest native on Genghis Khan titled Mongolian Tune Mongol An Quen Tobea An. The secret history of, which means the secret history of the Mongols, are quite different from the Italian and the Latin versions of Marco Polo's travel to the Mongol court do not match. Since the Mongols produced little literature on their own and were instead writing about by literary from the foreign culture, millennials historians have to often double as philologists to pick out the meaning of phrases for their closest approximation to Mongol uses. The work of scholars like Igor D. Rechevitz on the history of the Mongols and Garthrad Doefrar on the Mongol and Turkish terminologies that infiltrated into the Persian language bring out the difficulties involved in the studying the history of the Central Asian nomads. As we will notice through the remainders of this chapter, despite their incredible achievements, there is a such about Genghis Khan and the Mongol world empire still waiting the diligent scholars' scrutiny. This is Mongol Empire at its peak. Introduction. In early decade of 19th century, the great Mongol Empire of the Eurasia continent realized the danger posed to them by the arrival of the new political power to step on the Central Asia. Genghis Khan, 12 death is around 1227, had united the Mongol peoples. Genghis' political vision, however, went far beyond the creation of a confederacy of Mongol tribals in the steppes of the Central Asia. He had a mandate from gold to rule the world. Even through his own lifetime was spent consolidating his hold over the Mongol tribes, leading the directing campaign into the adjoining areas in the North China, Transjordan, Afghanistan, Eastern Iran, and the Russian steppes. His descendants traveled further afield to fulfill Genghis Khan's vision and create a largest empire the world had ever seen. It was the spirit of the Genghis Khan ideas that his grandson Monkey 1251 to 60 warned the French ruler Louis IX in 1226 to 70. In heaven there is only one eternal sky. On earth there is one Lord, Genghis Khan, the son of heaven. When by the power of the eternal heaven, the whole world from the rising of the sun to the setting shall be the one in the joy and the peace, then it will be made clear that we are going to do. If when you have understood the deceit of eternal heaven, you are unwilling to pay attention and believe it, saying, our country is far away, our mountains are might, our sea is vast, and this confidence you bring an army against us, we know what we can do. He whom made easy what was difficult and near what was far off, the eternal heaven knows. But were not in petty threats and the 1236-41 campaigns of the Batu. Another grandson of Genghis Khan devastated Russia outside Vienna in the 13th century. It did seem that the eternal sky was on the side of the Mongols and many parts of the China. The Middle East and Europe saw in Genghis Khan's conquest in the inhabitable world of the wrath of God, the beginning of day of judgment. The capture of Bukhara. Juwani, a late 30th century Persian chronicler of the Mongol ruler of Iran, carried an account of capture of Bukhara in 1220 Common Era. After the conquest of city, Juwanis reported Genghis Khan went to the festival ground where the rich residents of the city were and addresses him. O people, know that you have committed great sins and that the great ones among you have committed these sins. If you ask me what proof I have for these words, I say it because I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God could not have sent a punishment like me upon you. Now, one man had escaped from the Bukhara. Escaped from the Bukhara after its capture and had come to the Khurasan. He was questioned about the fate of the city and replied, they came, they mined the walls, they burnt, they slew, they plundered, and they departed. How did the Mongols create an empire that dwarfed the achievements of the other world conquerors? Alexander, in the pre-industrial age of Poor technological communication. What skills were developed by the Mongols to administer and control such a vast dominion? For some so self-confident, aware of his moral, divinely dispensed right to rule, how did Genghis Khan relate to the diverse social and the religious group that comprised his dominion? In the making of this imperial, what happened to its plurality? We need to start our discussion, however, with a number of set of questions to be better comprehend the social and the political background of the Mongols and the Genghis Khan. Who were the Mongols? Why did they live? Who did interact with, and how do we know about their society and politics? Social and political background. Mongols were a diverse body of people linked by the similarity of the language of the Tatars, Khitans, and Manchus to the east, and the Turkey tribes to the west. Some of the Mongols were pastoralistic while others are hunter-gatherers. The pastoralistic trained horses, sheep, and to a lesser extent cattle, goats, and camel. They nomadized in the steppes of the Central Asia in a tract of land in the area of the modern state of Mongol. This was and still is a majestic landscape with the wide horizon, rolling plains rigged by a snow-capped Altai mountains to the west and arid Gobi Desert in the south, and drained by a Onon and Siliga River and Myriad spring from the melting snow on the hills of the north and west. Lush lubricant grasses on the pasture and considerable small game were available in the good season. The hunter-gatherer resided to the north of the. This is the picture of Onion River plain in flood. Pastoralists, pastoralists in the Siberian forest. They were a humbler body of the peoples, and the pastoralists making a living from trade in the furs of animal trapped in the summer month. There were extreme of the temperature in the entire region, harsh, long winters uh, followed by brief dry summer. Agriculture was possible in the pastoral region during short part of the year, but the Mongols, unlike some of the Turks further west, did not take to farming. Either the pastorals nor the hunting-gathering economy could sustain dense population settled, and as a result, the region possessed no city. The Mongols live in tent gurs and travel with their herds from their winter to summer pasture land. Ethnic and language ties united the Mongol peoples, but scarce resources meant their society was divided into patrilineal lineages. The richer families were larger, possessed more animals and pasture land. They therefore had many followers and were more influential in local politics. Periodic natural calamities, either unusual harsh cold winters when game and stored provisions ran out, or drought which parched the grassland, would force families to forage further afields, leading to conflict over pasture lands and predator lands in the search of livestock. Group of families would occasionally ally for offensive and defensive purpose around richer and the more poor lineages. But barrier the few exceptions, these confederacies were usually small and short-lived. The size of the Genghis Khan confederacy of Mongol and Turkish tribes was perhaps matched in the size only by that which has been stitched together in the 5th century of Ata. 5th century of Attila, death of around 453. Unlike Attila, however, Genghis Khan's political system was far more durable and survived its founder. It was stable enough to counter large armies with emperor equipment in China, Iran, and Eastern Europe, and as they established control over this region, the Mongol administrated complex agrarian economy and the urban settlements, sedentary societies that were quite distinct from their own social experience and habitat. Although the social and political organization of the nomadic and agrarian economy were very different, the two societies were hardly foreign to each other. In fact, the scant resources of the steppen land drove Mongols and the other Central Asian nomads to trade and barter with their sedentary neighbors in China. This was mutually beneficial to both parties. Agricultural produce and the iron utensils from China were exchanged for horses, furs, and the game traps in the steppes. Commerce was not without its tensions, especially as the two groups unhesitatingly applied military pressure to enhance profit. When the Mongol lineages allied there could force their Chinese laborers to offer better terms, and the trade ties were sometimes discarded in the favor of the outright plundered. This relationship would alter when the Mongols were in disarray. The Chinese would then confidently assert their influence in the steppe. These frontier wars were more deliberating to settled societies. This dislocation agriculture and the plundered cities. Nomads, on the other hand, could retreat away from the zone of the conflict with marginal losses. Throughout its history, China suffered extensively from the nomad illustration from the different regime. Even as earlier as the 18th century before Common Era, built fortification to protect their subject starting from the 3rd century before Common Era. These fortifications started to be integrated into common defense outwork known as today as the Great Wall of China, a dramatically visual testament to the disturbance and the fear perpetrated by the nomadic raids on the agrarian society of North China. The Great Wall of China. The career of Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan was born sometimes around 1162 near the On river on the north of the present-day Mongolia. Named Tamunji, he was the son of the Yasuing, the chieftain of the Kiayat, a group of the families related to the Borgiard clan. His father was murdered at an early age, and his mother, Olium Ikek, raised Temunji, his brother, and the stepbrother in the great hardship. The following decade was full of the reversal. Tamunji was the captured and the enslaved, and soon after his marriage, his wife Border was kidnapped, and he was fight to recover her. During these days of the hardship, he also managed to make important friends. The young Bochurachu was the first ally and remained a trusted friend. Jamkua, his blood brother Anda, was another. Tamunji also restored old alliance with the ruler of the Kiritis, Tugril's own Khan. His father's old-blooded brother. Through the 1080s and the 1190s, Tamunjis remained an ally of Ong Khan and used the allies to defeat powerful adversaries like Jamukha, his old friend who had become a hostile foe. It was after defeating him the Tamunji felt confident enough to move against other tribes. The powerful Tatars, his father assassination, the Kritriyas and the Ong Khan himself in the 1203, the final defeat on the Niman people and the powerful Jamukwa in the 1206 left Mumji as the dominated personality in the politics of the Steppen lands, a position that was recognized at the assembly of Mongol chieftains Kuritilali, where he was proclaimed the Great Khan of the Mongols, Quam, with the title Changiz Khan, the Oceanic Khan or Universal Ruler. Just before the Quiril tie of 1206, Changiz Khan has recognized the Mongol people into a more effective, disciplined military forces. See the following section that facilitated the success of his future campaigns. The first of his concern was the conqueror to China, divided at this time into the three realms. The Hansi people of Tibet origin in the northern western provinces. The Juarsh Jorim Qin dynasty ruled North China from the Peking. The Sung dynasty who controlled South China. By 209, the Hsiang Hais were defeated. The Great Wall of China was breached in the 1213 and Peking is sacked in the 1205. Long drawn out battle against the China continued until 1234, but Changiz Khan was satisfied enough with the progress of his campaign to the return to the Mongolian homeland in 1216 and leave the military affairs of the region to the subordinates. After the defeat of 1218 of the Kwarakita, who controlled the Tianshan mountains northwest of the China, Mongol dominions reached the Amu Darya and the state of the Tanshunian and Khwarazm. Sultan Muhammad, the ruler of Khwarazm, felt in the fury of the Changiz Khan. Genghis Khan ranges when he executed Mongols envoys in the campaigns between 1219 and 1222. Great cities Otar, Bukhara, Samarkand, Balkhand, Gurganj, Merv, Nishapur and Herat surrendered to the Mongol forces. Towns that resisted were devastated. At Nishapur, where Mongol prince was killed during the siege operation, Changiz Khan commanded that the town should be laid waste in such a manner that the site could be ploughed upon, and that is a instruction of vigilance for the death of the prince. Not even cats and dogs should be left alive. Estimated extent of Mongol destruction. All the report of Changiz Khan campaign agree at the vast number of the people killed following the capture of the cities that defined his authority. The number of staggering at the capture of the Nishapur in 1220, 17,47,000 people were massacred, while the toll at the Herat in the 2022 was 16 lakh people, and at the Baghdad in 12,588 lakh peoples. Smaller towns suffer prosperity. Nashta 70,000 dead, Bakwal district 70,000, and at Tun in the Kushistan province 12,000 individuals were executed. How did medieval provinces arrived at this such figure? Juwani, the Persian chronicles at the three 125 crore people in Baghdad was dead. In Baghdad, 125 crore peoples. The current population of India is 135 crore, 140 crore almost. crosses the China. But at that time, Baghdad in Baghdad, the 125 crore peoples were massacred by Genghis Khan. How did medieval chronicles arrived at such figures? Juwani, the Persian chronicles at the Ikhwan, settled that 13 lakh peoples were killed in the Marv. He reaches the figure because he took 13 days to count the dead, and each day they counted 1 lakh corpus. Mongol forces in the pursuit of the Sultan Muhammad pushes into the Azerbaijan, defeated Russian forces at the Crimea and encircled the Caspian Sea. Another wing followed the Sultan's son Jalaluddin into Afghanistan and Sindh provinces at the banks of the Indus. Genghis Khan considered returning to Mongolia through North India and Assam, but the heat and the natural habitat and in-prostate report of the Salman Susistar made him change his mind. Genghis Khan died in the 1227, having spent most of his life in the military combat. His military achievements was astounding, as they were largely a result of his ability to innovate and transform different aspects of the steppe combat into extreme effective military strategies. The horse riding skill of the Mongols and the Turks provide speed and the mobility to the army. Their ability as rapid shooting archers from the horseback were further perfected during the regular hunting expedition, which doubled as field maneuvers. The steppe cavalry had always traveled light and moved quickly, but now it brought all its knowledge of the terrain and valor to the unimaginable. They carried about campaigns in the depth of the winter, threatening frozen rivers as highways to the enemy cities and the camps. Nomads were conventionally at the loss against a fortified campament, but Genghis Khan learned the importance of the siege engine and naphtha bombardment very quickly. His engineers prepared the light portable equipment which were used against the opponents with devastating effect. 1100 between 1660 birth of the Temujin, 1116 to 70s year spent in the slavery and struggle, 1118 to 90s period of alliance formation, 1203 and 27 expansion of triumph, 1206 Tamunjai proclaimed Genghis Khan universal ruler of Mongols, 1227 death of Genghis Khan, 1227 to 1260 ruler of the three great Khans, continued Mongol ruler of three great Khans and continued Mongol unity, 1227 to 41 Ogo Devi, son of the Genghis Khan, 1246 to 49 Guyuk, son of the Oghye Khan, 1251 to 16 Monguik, son of Genghis Khan's youngest son, 1236 to 43 campaign in Russia, Hungary, Poland and Australia under Batu, son of Joshi, Genghis Khan elder son, to 1253 to 55 beginning of the fresh campaigns in the Iran and China under Monking, 1258 capture of Baghdad, and at the end of the Abbasis Caliphate, establishment of the second Khamid state of Iran under Hulagu, younger brother of Monke, began to conflict between the Joshid and the second Khan. 1260 accession of the Kubilai Khan as Grand Khan in the Peking, conflict among descendants of the Genghis Khan, fragmentation of Mongol realm into dependent lineage, Toryun, Chinatai, Joshi, Ogodai lineage defeated the absorbed into the Toluids, Yang dynasty in China and second Khaniyad state in the Iran. Chaghatidids in the steppes north in the Taksunian and Turkestan. Joshid lineage in the Russian steppes described as the Golden Horde by the observers. 1257 to 67 region of Barke, son of Batu, reorientation of the Golden Horde from the Nestorian Christianity towards the Islam. Definitive conversion take place only in the 1350s, the start of the alliance between the Golden Horde and the Egypt against the second Khan. 1295 to 1304 region of the second Khanid ruler Gaza Khan in Iran. His conversion from the Buddhism to Islam to formed gradually by the other second Khanid chieftains. 1368 end of the Yuan dynasty in the China. 1370 to 1405 ruler of Temur, Barklan Turk who claimed Changez's Khanid descent through the lineage of the Changtai, established a Stephen empire that assimilated part of the dominion of the Tughlu, excluded China. Changtai and the Joshi proclaims himself Grugarian royal son-in-law and marries a prince of the Changez Khanid lineage. 1495 to 1530 Zaharuddin Babur, descent of the Temur and Changez Khan, succeed to the Tamurid territory of Fargana and the Samarkand. This spell captured the Kabul and in 1526 seizes Delhi and Agra, founded the Mughal Empire in India. Captured the Transoxania by the Shiabani Khan, descent of the Joshi youngest son Shiban, consolidated Shiabani power. Shibani is also described as the Uzbeki from whom Uzbekistan today get its name. In Transoxania, Marquess of the China conqueror Mongolia, 1921 Republic of Mongolia. The Mongolia after Changez Khan. We can divide Mongolia expansion after Changez Khan death into the two distinct phases. The first phase spanned the year of 1236 to 42, when the major gains were the Russia, Stipend, Bulgaria, Kiev, Poland and Hungary. The second phase included the year 1255-1300, led the conquest of the all China. 1279 Iran, Iraq and the Syria, and the frontier of the empire established after the campaign. The Mongol military forces met with the few reversal in the decades after 203, but quite noticeable after 1260. The original impetus of the campaigns could not be sustained in the West. Although Vienna and beyond it, Western Europe as well as the Egypt was within the grasp of the Mongol forces, their retreat from the Hungarian steppes and the defeat at the hands of the Egyptian forces signaled the emergence of the new political trend. There was the two phases to this. The first was the consequences of the eternal politics of the succession within the Mongol family, where the descendants of the Joshi and Oligurian aligned to control the offices of the Great Khan in the first two generations. These interests were more important than the pursuit of the campaign in the Europe. The second compulsion occurs as the Joshi and the Oligo lineage were marginalized by the Tolugioid branch of the Changez Khanid descendants. With the ascension of the Monke of Changez Khanid descendants, with the accession of Monke, descendants of the Toli, Changez Khan's youngest son, military campaign were persuaded energetically in Iran during the 1250, but the Toluyid interest is the conquest of the China increased during the 1260. Forces and the supplies were increasingly divided into the heartlands of the Mongol dominion. As a result, Mongols fielded a small understandified force against the Egyptian military. They defeated the increasing preoccupational with the China of the Toluyard family marked the end of the western expansion of the Mongols. Concurrently, the conflict between the Joshid and the Toluyard descendants among the Russia and Iran frontier diverted the Jochids away from the further European campaigns. The expansion of Mongol expansion in the west did not arrest their campaigns in the China, which was the reunite under the Mongol. Paradoxically, it was the moment of the greatest succession that the internal disturbance between the members of the ruling family manifested itself. The next section discussed the factors that led to the some of the greatest succession of the Mongol political enterprise, but also inhibited its progress. Social, political, and the military organization among the Mongol and many other nomadic societies as well. All the able-bodied adult male of the tribe bore arms. They continued the armed forces when the occasion demanded. The unification of the different Mongol tribes and subsequent campaigns against the diverse people introduced the new member into Genghis Khan army, complicating the composition of this relatively small under differently body into an incredible heterogeneous mass of people. It included groups like the Turkish Uruguayans who had accepted the authority willingly. It also included defeated peoples like the Karyants who were accommodated in the Confederacy despite their early hostility. Genghis Khan worked to systematically erase the old tribal identities of the different groups who joined the Confederacy. His army was organized according to the old Stephen system of the decimal unity in division of tens, hundreds, thousands, and notably 10,000 soldiers. In the old system, the clan and the tribal would have coexisted within the decimal unit. Genghis Khan stopped his practices. He divided the old tribal grouping and distributed their members into new military units. Any individual who tried to move from his and her allotted group without the permission received harsh punishment. The larger unit of soldiers, approximately 10,000 soldiers, Tuman, now included fragmented group of the peoples from a variety of different tribes and clans. This altered the old Stephen social order, integrating the different lineages, and the clans are provided them with a new identity derived from the progenitor Genghis Khan. The new military contingents were required to serve under the four son and especially chosen captains of his army unit called Noan. Also important within the new realm were a band of followers who had served Genghis Khan loyally through grave adversely for the many years. Genghis Khan publicly honored some of these individuals as a blood brother, Anda. Yet another freemen of the humbler rank were gave a special ranking to his bloodsman Naukar. A little that marked this close relationship between their masters. This ranking did not preserve the light of the old clan chieftains. The new aristocracy derived its status from the close relationship with the great Khan of Mongols. In this new hierarchy, Genghis Khan assigned the responsibility of the governing the newly conquered people to his four sons. This comprises the four ulus, a term that did not originally mean fixed territory. Genghis Khan's lifetime was still the age of rapid conquest and expanding dominion, where fortified were still extremely fluid. For example, the eldest son Joshi received the Russian stipend, but the farthest earliest of this territory, Ulus and the interdeterminant, it extended as far west as his horses could roam. The second son, Changhatai, was given the Transocamian stipend and lands north to the Pamir Mountains, adjacent to those of his brother. Presumably, these lands would shift as Joshi marched westland. Genghis Khan had indicated that his third son Ogodai would succeed him as a great Khan, and on accession, the prince established his capital as Karakorum. Karakoram Ladakh established his capital Karakoram. The youngest son Togli received the essential land of Mongolia. Genghis Khan envisages that his sons would rule the empire collectively, and to underline this point, military contingents Tama of the individual province were placed in the each ulus. The sense of dominion shared by the members of the family ulus. The sense of dominion shared by the members of the family under the underline at the assembly of the chieftains. Quiril Trans, where all the decisions relating to the family or the state of the forthcoming season campaign, distribution of plundered pastured land or succession would collectively taken. Mocking, Tubali, Hungli, Erijobruk, Batu, Barke, Gurun, Togli, Joshi, Shangtai, Oguriai. Genghis Khan. How many sons? 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 sons. Wow. Genghis Khan already fashioned a rapid courier system that connected the distinct areas of his region. Fresh mount and dispatch riders were placed in outposts at regular placed distance. For the maintenance of this communication system, the Mongol nomad contributed a tenth of their herds, either the horses or the livestock as the provisions. This was called the Kubar taxes, a leave that the nomad would willingly for the multiple benefits that it brought. The courier system Yang was further refined after the Genghis Khan death, and it speeded the reliability surprised travelers. It enabled the great Khan to keep a check on the development at the farthest end of their regime across the continental landmass. The conquered people, however, hardly felt a sense of affinity with their new nomadic master. During the campaign in the first half of the 13th century, cities under destroyed agricultural lands, laid waste trade, and the handicraft production disrupted. Tens of thousands of the people, the exact figure are the lost in the aggregated reports of the time, were killed, even more enslaved. All classes of people from the elites to the peasantry suffered in the resulting instability. The underground canals called qanats in the arid Iranian plateau could no longer receive the periodical maintenance. As they were fell into the disrepair, the desert crept in. This led to an ecological devastation from which the parts of the ocean never discovered. ये हमारा कंप्लीट हो जाता तो हम जाए. Once the dust of the campaign had settled, Europe and the China were territory linked in the peace urged in the Mongolian conquest. Pax Mongolica, trade connection measured. Commerce and the travel along the Silk Route reaches its peak under the Mongol, but unlike before, the trade routes did not terminate in China. They continue north into Mongolia and the Karakoram, the heart of the new empire. Continuation and ease of the travel under the vital and the retain the coherence of the Mongol region, and travelers were given the Mongol empire. The Silk Route is established by the Mongolians. A paisa in Persia, Krizin in Mongolia. For the safe conduct, traders paid a badge tax for the same purpose, all acknowledging thereby the authority of the Mongol Khan. The contradiction between the nomadic and the sedentary elements within the Mongol Empire is through the 13th century. In the 1230, for the example, as Mongol wages their successful war against the Qin dynasty in the North China, there was a strong pressure group within the Mongol leadership that advocate and massacre of all peasantry and conservation of their fields into pasture land. But by the 1270, when South China was annexed to the Mongol Empire after the defeat of the Sung dynasty, Genghis Khan's grandson Kubilai Khan, death in 1294, appeared as the protector of the peasants and cities. In the 1290, Mongol ruler Iran Gaza Khan, in death in 304, descendants of the Chengiz Khan youngest son Towli warned family members and other generals to avoid Kliangi the peasantry. It did not lead to a stable, prosperous realm. He advised in a speech would sedentary overtones would have made Chengiz Khan shoulder. Gaza Khan speech. Gaza Khan 1295 to 304 was the first second Khanid ruler to convert to Islam. He gave the following speech to Mongol Turkish nomad commander, a speech that was probably drafted by the Persian Wazir Raziduddin and included the minister's letter. I am not on the side of the Persian peasantry. If there is a purpose in the pilgrim them all, there is no one with the more power to do this than I. Let us rob them together. But if we wish to do certain by collecting grains and foods for your tables in the future, I must harsh with you, you must be taught reason. If you insult the peasantry, take their oxen and seeds and trample their crops into the ground. What will you do in the future? The obedient peasantry must be distinguished from the peasantry who are rebels. From Chengiz Khan's regime itself, Mongols had recruited civil administration from the conqueror societies. They were sometimes moved around Chinese secretaries deployed in Iran and Persian in China. They help in integrating the distance dominant and their background and training were always useful in blunting and their background and training the harshness edges of the nomadic predation on the sedentary life. The Mongol Khan trusted them as long as they continued to raise revenue for their masters. This administration could continue command considerable influence. In the 1230s, the Chinese administration Yang Lu Tisung muted some of the Ojidai more rapacious instinct. The Juwanis family played a similar role in Iran through the latter half of the 13th century and at end of the century the Wazir Rasiduddin drafted the speech that Gaza Khan delivered it to the Mongol compatriots, asking them to protect, not harass the peasantry. The pressure to sedentaries was greater in the new areas of Mongol domicile, area distinct from the original steppe habitats of the nomads. By the middle of the 13th century, the sense of the common peritomy shared by all the brothers were gradually replaced by the individual destiny, each ruling their separate ulus atoms which now carried the sense of the territorial dominion. This was in part a result of succession struggles, where Chengiz Khan Khanid descendants competed for the office of the Chengiz Khan and prized pastoral lands. Descendants of the Towli had come to rule both China and Iraq, where they had formed the Yuan and Second Khanid dynasty. Descendants of the Jochi formed the Golden Horda and ruled the Russia steppes. Changtai successor ruled the steppes of the Transokania and the lands called Turkestan today. Noticeably, nomadic tradition persistence longest among the steppe dwellers in the Central Asia. Descendants of the Changtai and Russia, the Golden Horde. The gradual separation of the descendantry of the Chengiz Khan into the separate lineage group implied that their connection with the memory and traditions of a past family concordance also altered. At an obvious level, this was the result of the competition among the cousins Khans, and here the Tolugiad branch was more adequate in the presenting their version of the family disagreement. In the history produced under their patronage. To a large extent, this was the consequence of their control of China and Iran, and the large number of literati and that is family members could recruit at a more sophisticated level, and the disengagement and with the past also meant underlining the merits of the regnant rulers as a contrast to other past monarchs. This This exercise in comparison did not include Genghis Khan himself. Persian chronicles produced in the Second Khanid Iran during the late 13th century detail the glory killing of the Genghis Khan and great aggregated and the number killed, for the example, in contrast to the eyewitness reporting that the 400 soldiers defended the citadel of Burkhana, and Second Khanid Chronicle reported that the 30,000 soldiers were killed in the attack on the citadel. Although Second Khanid report still eulogistic Genghis Khan, they also carried a settlement of the relief that times had changed, and the great killing of past were over. The Genghis Khanid legacy was important, but for this descendants to appear as conveniencing heroes to the sedentary audience, they could no longer appear in the quite the same way as the ancestors. Following the researchers of the David Acklin recent work on the Yasha, the code of law that Genghis Khan was supposed to have promulgated at the quarantine of 1206, has elaborated on the complex way in which the memory of the great Khan was fashioned by his successor. It was earliest formulated that the term was written is Yangsa, which means law, deceit, or order. Indeed, the few details that we posed about the Yangsang concern administrative regulation and the organization of the hunt, the army, and the postal system. By the middle of the 13th century, however, the Mongols had started using the retailable term Yasa in a more general sense to mean the legal code of Genghis Khan. We may be able to understand the changes in the meaning of the occurrence of the same time. By the middle of the 13th century, Mongol has emerged as the unified people and just created the large empire and world has ever seen. They ruled over very sophisticated urban societies with their respective historic culture and laws. Although the Mongol dominated the region politically, they were a numerically minority. The one way is which they could protect their identity and distinctiveness was though claim a scarred law given them by their ancestor. The Yansa was all the probability a comparison of the customary tradition of the Mongol tribes, but in referring it to as Genghis Khan code of law, the Mongol peoples also laid the claim of the law given like Moses and Solomon, whose authoritative code would be imposed on their subjects. The Yasa served to be coherent on the Mongol peoples around a body of the sharp belief. It acknowledged their affinity to Genghis Khan and his descendants, and even as they observed different aspects of the sanitary life, gave them the confidence to retain their ethnic identity and impose their law upon their defeat subject. It was an extremely empowering ideology, although Genghis Khan many not have planned such a legal code. It was certainly inspired by the vision and vital construction of the Mongol universal dominion, Yasa. In 1221, after the conquest of Burkhana, Genghis Khan had assembled the rich Muslim residents at the festival ground and admonished them. He called the seniors and warned them to compensate for their sins by parting with their hidden wealth. The episode was dramatically enough to be painted, and for a long time afterward, people still remember the incident. In the late 16th century, Abdullah Khan, a distinct descendant of the Joshi, Genghis Khan's eldest son, went to the same festival ground in the Burkhana. Unlike Genghis Khan, however, Abdullah Khan went to perform his holiday prayer there. In his chronicles, Hafiz-e-Tushana reported this performance of Muslim prayer by his master and included the surprising comment. This was according to the Yasa of Genghis Khan. Conclusion. Situation: Genghis Khan and the Mongols in world history. When we remember Genghis Khan today, the only images that we appear the imagination that are those of the conqueror and the destroyers of the city, and an individual who is responsible for the deaths of the thousands of the people. Many 13th century residents of the town of the China, Iran, Eastern Europe looked the hurdles and the steepens with the far and the distant. And yet for the Mongols, Genghis Khan was the greatest leader for the time. He united the Mongol people, freed them with the intermediate tribal wars and the Chinese exploration, brought them prosperity, fashioned a grand transcontinental empire, and restored trade routes and marked them, attracted distinct travel like the Vatican, इटली का यात्री था, वेटियन जिसे बोल जाता है, वेटिकन सिटी था, से आता था द वेटियन मार्को पोलो. द contrasting image are not simply a case of dissimilar perspective. They should make us pause and reflect on how one dominant perspective can completely erase all other. Beyond the dominion of the defeated sedentary peoples, considered for a moment of the sheer size of the Mongol dominion on in 3rd century, and the diverse population of the peoples and the faiths that it remembers. Although Mongol Khan themselves belonged to a variety of different faiths, Shahnama, Buddhist, Christian, and eventually Islam, they never let the personal belief dedicated public policy. The Mongol ruler recruited the administration and the armed continuous the people to the all ethnic group and religion. There was a built ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious rhyme that did not feel threatened by the pluralistic constitution. This was the utterly usual for the time, and the historians are the only house studying the ways in which the Mongols provided ideological models for the latter rhyme. Like Mongol of the India, to follow the nature of the documentation of the Mongols and any nomadic rhymes make it virtually impossible to understand the inspiration and lead of the confederation of the fragmented into the groups of the peoples in the pursuit of the ambition to create an empire. The Mongol Empire eventually altered in the different minuals, but the inspiration of its founder remained as a powerful force. At the end of the 14th century, Timur, another monarch who aspired to the universal dominion, hesitated to declare himself monarch because he was not of the Genghis Khan's descent. When he did declare his dependent sovereignty, it was the son-in-law of Gurian of the Genghis Khanid family. Today, after the decades of the Soviet control, the country of Mongolia recreated its identity as an independent nation. It has seized upon the Genghis Khan as a great national hero, who is the publicly veteran and whose the achievement are recounted with pride. At a crucial junction as the history of Mongolia, Genghis Khan has once again appeared as an iconic figure for the Mongol peoples. Mobilizing memories of the great past of the forging and the national identity can be carried the nation into the future. Kulib Khan and the Chapi in the camp. Question 1. Why the trade so significant to Mongols? The region was occupied by Mongols, lacked natural resources, and the steppe region of Central Asia had extreme climate. Cultivation of food was not possible. Gobi Desert is located in the Mongolia, in recent Mongolia. Mongolia, recent Mongolia capital is Ulaanbaatar. Only trade could help their survival. The Mongols were forced to trade as scarcely resources of the steppe did not help cultivation. So the Mongols traded with the neighboring countries, and it's beneficial for the both the countries. Question 2. Why did Genghis Khan feel that need of the fragments the Mongol tribes into new social and military grouping? The following reasons forced the Genghis Khan into the tribal group in the social military grouping. Mongols were the inhabitants of the steppe region. They had their own separate identity. So, in order to bring them in touch with the other tribes, Genghis Khan looked in the steppe. Mongol Khan were courageous people. Because of his nature, Genghis Khan organized them into the military group and established a formidable army. A sound military organization could be very careful in the trade also. Childhood experience of the Genghis Khan was also responsible for the fragmentation of the Mongol tribes. Genghis Khan himself had to suffer a lot during his childhood. How do later Mongolia reflected on the Yasa bring out the uneasy relation with the memories of the Genghis Khan? Yasa were the rule and regulation. These were the approved by the Kuritali during the Genghis Khan region. These rules were the mainly concreted with the Mongol army, hunting posture system, social ladder, etc. There were the compilation of the tradition and the customer that they believe in the Mongol tribal society itself. If the history relies upon the written records produced by the city-based elitist nomad society will always receive a hostile representation. Would you agree these settlements? Does it explain the reason why Persian chronicles produce such inflated figures of the casualty resulting from the Mongol campaign? Yes, I agree with the settlements given. There were the vast difference between the secret society of Mongol and the Marco Polo Travelonian in the terms of the events and their description. Being the transcontinental span of the Mongol Empire, the sources were written in the different languages. Persian chronicles produced inflated figure of the casualties resulting from the Mongol campaign to prove their cruelty or to prove them as crucial assassins. Keeping the nomadic elements of the Mongol and the Bedouin society in the mind, how is your opinion? Did their respective historical experience differ? What explanation would you suggest account for this? Mongols were the tribes in the steppe in the Central Asia, diverse body of the people linked with the similar in the languages, Khitan, Manuch in the east of the Turkey tribes to the west. Bedouins were Arab tribes moving from the dry to green desert in the search of food and the fodder for cattle. Some Mongolians were the pastorists while others were the hunter-gatherer. On the other hand, Bedouins were the pastorists, agriculturalists and the traders because of the central Rhimes island surrounded by the sea from a fourth side. The steppe inhabitants usually produced no literature, so our knowledge of nomadic societies under Mongols are quite different, and the Italian and Latin version of Marco Polo travel to the Mongol court do not match. How does the following accounts enlarge upon the character of Pax Mongolia created by the Mongol by the middle name of 13th century? The Franciscan monk William of Ruburuka was sent by the Louis VI of France on the embassy of a great Khan monking court. He reached the Karakoram, the capital of Monki, in the 1254 and came upon a woman for the Lorraine in France called the Paquita, who had been brought from the Hungary and was in the service of one of the prince's wives who had the Nestorian Christian, and at the court of he became across the Persian goldsmith named Gulinian Bachuria, who brought the dwelt on the grand post in the Paris. This man was first employed by the Queen Sargotani and by the monking younger brother. Rubruka found that at the great court festival, the Nestorian priests were admitted first with the regalia to the bless the Grand Khan Cup and were followed by the Muslim priest and the Buddhist and the Taoist monk. The above account depicts the character of the Pax Mongolica by the middle of the 13th century. It became clear that the above incident that the French monarch Louis VI had sent his ambassador William of Rubruck to the Karakoram, the capital of Monking, in the 1254. This epic that the Mongol ruler has established a well-cleaned relation with his neighbors. Guliam Butcher proved that Mongol rulers lived with the great pomp and snow, and they had brought servants to serve them from the different part of the world. They were paid good salary. That is why they reached to serve Mongol courts from far away. Mongol rulers were not fanatics and anxious to get the blessing of all peoples. They recruited administrator and armed forces from peoples of all ethnic group and religious. They were the multilingual, multi-religious realms that did not feel threatened by the pluralistic constitution. The above description display the best aspect of Pax Mongolica. It is said that the vast empire of Mongol has established such a rule that one could walk freely without the fear of robbery, because it is robbery by the Mongol itself. Thank you.